Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland that keeps you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Louise Hickey and Francess McDonnell. Well, in national news, the last week or so has been dominated by election coverage. Local election counts are now completed, but counting in the European elections is continuing, and we'll bring you up to speed on that in just a few moments. However, we're going to start this week with water quality, which has been a frequent topic of conversation on the Farming Week and within the agriculture sector in general for several months now, as the sector continues to consider the precarious future of the nitrates derogation. This week, the Environmental Protection Agency said in a new report that Ireland's water quality has not seen any significant improvement in 2023. According to the EPA, nutrient pollution from agriculture and wastewater is the biggest issue impacting water at present. Francess, can you take us through the details of this report?
In this report, Charles, the EPA outlined its latest findings on key indicators of water quality, and it used monitored data collected in 2023. The bottom line from the report is that water quality in Ireland is not improving and nutrient levels remain too high in a large proportion of water bodies. The report, Water Quality in 2023, an Indicators Report, outlined that the main issue which impacts on the quality of Ireland's waters, and that includes rivers, lakes, estuaries and groundwaters, and their biological health, is increased concentrations of nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen. Basically, the EPA identified agriculture, wastewater, and that includes domestic and urban, and forestry as the primary cause of nutrient loss to our waters. This new report showed that water quality generally in Ireland is not improving, and while the EPA acknowledged that some improvements are being made, these are really being offset by declines elsewhere. Now, the agency has identified that average nitrate levels in rivers, groundwater, estuaries and coastal waters were largely unchanged in 2023 compared to their 2022 results. It particularly highlighted that elevated levels of nitrogen in waters are found mainly in the east, southeast and south of the country, and these are too high to support good water quality in estuaries. The agency also warned that this is primarily attributable to intensive agricultural activities on free draining soils in these areas. One other key issue that we see in the report is that average phosphorus levels in rivers and lakes are also mainly unchanged in 2023 and remain too high in over 1/4 of rivers and 1/3 of lakes. And while the key message coming from the report is that while there are initiatives happening nationally, and we've been covering a lot of these in the podcast, these projects are perhaps not happening at the scale or pace required according to the EPA.
And there's been several reactions to this report, Francess, from a range of stakeholders, including farmer organisations and environmental groups. What's the feeling out there after the publication of this report?
Well, the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society has defended farmers' commitment to water quality. Their president, Edward Carr, said that it's clear to see across the farming and cooperative sectors that there is massive investment going on to protect water, and he believes this commitment and activity will only increase in the years ahead. The Irish Farmers Association also warned that some initiatives that individual farmers want to take to improve water quality could be frustrated by delays in grant approvals from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. While the president of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, Dennis Drennan, also said he's confident that Irish farmers will deliver on water quality improvements, but what is needed is a collaborative approach, working with farmers and dealing with issues on a site-specific basis. But of course, Charles, this new report comes against the backdrop of Ireland's ongoing campaign to retain its nitrates derogation. So will the EPA report have an impact on that? Here's what the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McDonnell, told Agriland.
It doesn't change in terms of the government commitment to supporting everyone to continue with the work of improving water. And indeed, nor our absolute commitment to retaining the derogation and committing to carrying out the work at European level.
And that was the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McDonnell, talking to Agriland. So the overall message here, Charles, this week is that while there is genuinely a lot of work being done on water quality across the country, there appears to be a lot more to do.
Thanks, Francess. And just while we're on the topic of environment and agriculture, there were interesting developments in New Zealand this week. The government that was elected there last year has decided to take agriculture out of the country's emissions trading scheme. The previous government had proposed including agriculture in the scheme, which requires businesses to measure and report on their emissions. However, agriculture will be excluded from that commitment under this current government in New Zealand, and you can read that interesting story on Agriland.ie. Well, we did mention at the start of the show that we would be bringing you the main highlights so far from the 2024 European and local elections. We're going to start with the European elections, and of course, in this day and age, the European Parliament has huge influence over EU farming and environment policy, and Ireland has 14 seats in the new Parliament. So, Louise, from the Irish point of view, as we're recording this, what's the latest news on the European elections?
Yes, Charles, so we're now on the 5th day of the European election count. At this point, 8 of the country's 14 seats for Europe are still to be filled. We've seen some dramatic shifts across the country in the past few days. There's been some familiar faces and new faces, of course, partly thanks to transfer votes. This is not just in Ireland, but right across Europe. Counting is now finished in the Dublin constituency. Fine Gael's Regina Doherty, Fianna Fáil's Barry Andrews, Sinn Féin's Lynn Boylan and Labour's Aidan O'Riordan have all secured seats. In Ireland's south, in a very short space of time, Sean Kelly was re-elected on the first election count. On his 18th count, Billy Kelleher has been re-elected with 120,105 votes. His surplus of 5,344 votes will now be distributed on the 19th count. Behind him is Michael McNamara, closely followed by Kathleen Funchion and Cynthia Naverku. Not much is in it there. Grace O'Sullivan of the Green Party lost her seat today on the 19th count. In her concession speech, she said she had fought tooth and nail for Irish farmers and the environment. This was through her involvement in Mercosur. She thanked her team and supporters and said they left no stone unturned. It is also worth noting, Charles, that former Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, also known as the ICSA, General Secretary Eddie Punch is no longer in the running. The Independent Ireland candidate was eliminated at the 14th count. 10 candidates remain in the race to fill the 5 seats in the Midlands North West constituency. Luke Ming Flanagan is well ahead there with a lead of almost 15,000 votes at the minute. The distribution of votes of independent candidate Peter Casey saw gains for Flanagan and Kieran Mullooly of Independent Ireland. This is followed by Nina Carberry, Maria Walsh and Barry Cowan, who are all bunched together at the moment, but there's still a long way to go there.
And then in the local elections as well, Louise, which we can't forget, there were some familiar faces there as well, wasn't there?
Yes, so counting has now ended for the local elections. Fianna Fáil received the most seats at 248. Fine Gael received 245. Next we had Independents that filled 186 seats. Sinn Féin filled 102. Then we had Labour with 56, Social Democrats with 35 and the Green Party got 23. Former president of the ICSA, Dermot Kelleher, was also not elected. Kelleher received 1,337 votes, just behind independent elected councillor Martin Coughlin, who received 1,478. Former chair of the Irish Farmers Association Sheep Committee, Kevin Comiskey, has also been unsuccessful in his election bid. The County Leitrim man stood as a Fine Gael candidate in the Manor-Hamilton local electoral area in County Leitrim. Comiskey finished up on 631 votes, some 276 short of the quota of 907. He spoke to Agriland after the results and said he was disappointed with the outcome. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
It wasn't to be on the day. It was, I was the last man standing. I ended up with 631 votes. And, you have to take solace in that. It wasn't a bad result at the end of it all. So, it just, I suppose, the whole thing was the swing to the independents maybe, and that was it.
And then, Charles, for a bit of a positive highlight, we all love a little bit of a dance every now and then, I suppose, and our councillors are no different. So when independent councillor and manager of Kenmare Marsh, Dan McCarthy, got re-elected to Kerry County Council, he decided to liven up the County Centre with a line dance. Upon the returning officer, when he made the announcement, his family and supporters took to the floor and he joined in. McCarthy said that the dancing took him by surprise. He also said he is deeply honoured to represent his area for another 5 years. Here's a clip from McCarthy after the celebrations.
Once the count was done and the election was over, the whole lot of them jumped out on the floor, they put on the music and they danced, and I think that's what life is and what it's all about, having a bit of crack and enjoying it. And if you're into, like, some people think that politics is serious, but if we take everything in life serious, we'll never get anywhere. So the case to take a chance, get on with it.
Well, congratulations to Dan McCarthy and indeed all elected candidates across both local and European elections. Moving on now, and while we are now getting periods of dry and fine weather in between the spells of rain, many farms are still feeling the effects of the extremely wet weather we experienced for most of the last 12 months. And for that reason, the deadline for spreading lime under the National Liming Programme has once again been extended by Minister Charlie McDonnell. Louise, what has the Minister said on this?
So, lime purchased under the scheme can now be spread until Thursday, October 31st. This means the deadline has been pushed out by a further 4 months. The previous liming deadline was June 28th. The Ministry said that while he had hoped the previous extension would allow ground conditions improve to allow the spreading of lime, soil trafficability has not improved sufficiently in some parts of the country.
Thanks for that update, Louise. We're going to move on now and talk about the Targeted Agricultural Modernisation Scheme. This week, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine confirmed that payments would begin to applicants who have made claims for the completed investments they applied for. So, Louise, how much money is expected to be paid out this week?
Yes, so payments totalling almost €1.4 million under TAMS are set to issue this week and will continue to issue on a weekly basis as claims are submitted in respect of completed investment. Over 12,000 approvals are to commence for investments that have issued under Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 of the scheme to date. Following some reaction to the announcement, IFA National Rural Development Chair John Curran said that it's essential that the number of farmers are paid and paid promptly. He said that many of these farm investments were made and costs incurred many months ago, particularly for mobile assets.
Thanks, Louise. And just while we're on the topic of money going into farmers' pockets, we also saw this week the first milk prices for May being announced by dairy processors. As we're recording, we've seen both Lakeland and Kerry hold their milk prices. Lakeland will pay a base price of 41.9 cents per litre as well as an input support payment of 1 cent a litre for a total of 42.9 cents per litre at standard constituents in the Republic of Ireland. Northern Irish suppliers to Lakeland, a 0.8 pence per litre input support will be added to the base price to give a total price of 35.3 pence per litre. Kerry, meanwhile, will pay 41 cents per litre to its suppliers at standard constituents. But moving on now, and hot on the tails of the recent publication of the National Biomethane Strategy, a Danish investment firm has announced that it wants to establish 7 AD plants in Ireland, that's anaerobic digestion. Louise, can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, so Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners announced the launch of the Greengate Biogas Partnership, which will see the development of 7 anaerobic digestion plants here in Ireland. Under the partnership, CIP, Atlas Renewables and Energex partners will join forces to develop, construct and operate biogas plants in each region across Ireland, focusing on using manure as feedstock. When the projects are fully up and running, they will together produce nearly 1.8 terawatt hours per year of biomethane. So then just to put that into perspective, that would account for about 3.5% of the country's natural gas demand and 30% of Ireland's biomethane strategy. The primary objective of the newly published biomethane strategy is to support the delivery of a target of up to 5.7 terawatt hours produced of biomethane by 2030. The government sought €40 million in capital funding under Ireland's application to EPA EU. And notably in the strategy, it states that it will be agri-led and farmer-centric. So the 7 plants to be set up in Ireland under the new partnership will inject biomethane into the national grid and recirculate organic fertiliser to farmers. Manure will be the predominant feedstock that will be sourced in close collaboration with 2,000 Irish livestock farmers. Around 500,000 tonnes of manure will be converted per project, in addition to 100,000 tonnes of industrial organic waste. And Greengate Biogas has said that it will help reduce emissions from the agricultural sector and address nitrate challenges as well.
Finally this week, one thing readers of Agriland have always shown a huge interest in is the traditional farm building scheme, which provides funding to allow for the restoration of old farm buildings so that they can be put to new use. And while many buildings involved in the scheme are several decades old, or even upwards of 100 years old, one building in County Kerry has recently benefited from the scheme 200 years after its original construction, Louise.
Yes, Charles, so a building in Adford, County Kerry, that had been previously used for housing horses and more recently served as a chicken house, has been restored as part of the traditional farm building scheme run by the Heritage Council and by the Department of Agriculture. The building is located on a beef and tillage farm, and as you said, it's about 200 years old. Stone, lime, mortar and a corrugated iron roof were all used in the restoring of the building. The north side of the building was in reasonably good condition but needed work as water was leaking through the existing roof for many years. The south part of the building was in bad shape, quickly deteriorating after the roof had fallen in and the weather had got into the stonework. The conservation restoration was guided by Mark Dignam of Mehel Architects. The walls and gables were restored by Timmy Quilter of Quilter Stonework. Unfortunately, all of the existing corrugated sheets were rusty and leaking, so none of them could be salvaged. There were remnants of the thatch present under the old roof, which after inspection were recorded and then removed as it had become rotten over time. The old trusses, however, were left, including multiple swallow nests which had been there for many years. The building really has been given a new lease of life, and there are a few photos there on Agriland that can be seen.
Thanks, Louise, and let's hope the building's still there in another 200 years for future generations as well. That's just about all we have time for this week. Just before we go, we just want to acknowledge President Michael D. Higgins, who has been presented with the Agricola Medal by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. The medal's name, Agricola, is Latin for farmer, and it's presented to international figures who have undertaken outstanding efforts in advancing the cause of global food security, poverty alleviation and nutrition. So congratulations to President Higgins on that award. But that is all we have time for now. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Louise, Francess and myself, have a great weekend.